outside the table, they respected me back. That's something that group doesn't understand.
The honourable member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The honourable member for Preston has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, in 2011, the NDP passed changes to the Land Registration Act, which were supposed to clarify land titles in the province. However, it has come to our attention that there are still gaps being experienced by Nova Scotians. When faced with a dispute over property lines, Nova Scotians are finding that their only recourse is through expensive court battles that can take years and cost thousands of dollars. And in the end, a satisfactory outcome may or may not happen for both parties. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations admit there are serious issues with the present system?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I have to say that I would find it hard to believe that anything instituted by any government may not have some issues, but I am hearing very little that's coming to my office as far as the issues that the honourable member raises, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I asked this question to the Minister recently, and his answers were that there's no avenues on a provincial level until 10 years after the problem has existed. The Minister indicated that outside an expensive and prolonged court battle, Nova Scotians could only bring challenges forward to either the Bar Association or to the Association of Land Surveyors. For Nova Scotians faced with this situation, there is a gap, and it's clear that the government has fallen short when ensuring that a system is in place that will actually give landowners clear title to their property. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister consider a binding arbitration process to fill the current gap in legislation and regulation which fall under the Land Registration Act?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I say I am a little curious that the question is being asked for a second time. The land registration system, or migration, I guess, as the member is referring to, the province does take responsibility after 10 years. So up until that time, it is at the responsibility of the landowners. A big part of this, obviously, is the way the descriptions on deeds are interpreted, and I guess it's all in knowing where to draw the line, Mr. Speaker. So I would say that this government has no plan at the present time to make any changes, and actually the number that's what the courts are for conflicts, civil conflicts between individuals, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, according to information that the Minister of Health gave to me during budget estimate, and this is information I do believe the Minister was correct, for the second year in a row, Nova Scotia had 50 or more people identified as contracting Lyme disease. While members of the legislature may be aware that Lyme disease is contracted by a black-legged tick, members of the public may not be so aware. So, Mr. Speaker, last year's public information campaign appears to have consisted of one newspaper ad and some pamphlets left at Access Nova Scotia sites and the odd press release. Now that we know that the spike in 2011 of 54 cases wasn't a fluke, repeated again last year, 50 cases there, what specific plans does the Minister of Health have for a public awareness campaign this year?
Of Health and Wellness.
I know. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm a bit perplexed because they yell when we do advertise about things, and they yell when we don't advertise about things. But I can reassure all Nova Scotians and the member opposite that we take that Lyme disease and the tick population in Nova Scotia very seriously. I could talk very loud, Mr. Speaker, if I have to. We take it very seriously. But we take it very seriously, honestly. Yeah, that's why our government website has increased, or make sure that we have really good data on the areas around the province that we think there's a higher incident of black-legged ticks in those areas, Mr. Speaker. We're going to commit to another campaign this year. I mentioned in estimates that I meet regularly with Doctors Nova Scotia who have news releases out to all their members, Mr. Speaker, so physicians are aware to make sure that if they look for signs or symptoms of people who are ill. So we're going to continue to do that. We talk regularly with the district health authorities, with the physicians, so we will do another campaign this year, and we'll ensure that as many people know about the likelihood of contracting Lyme disease around with the black-legged tick population here in the province.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the minister will remember occasions where I've actually stood in this House and said, I will not object to advertisements that go out that actually convey information to the electorate, to the public. We don't mind that. What we object to, Mr. Speaker, are the blatant political partisan advertisements that are just feel good, please vote for us kinds of advertisements that this government puts out day after day after day after day. Mr. Speaker, I have yet to see a commercial air for a sexual assault strategy, or what to do if you're raped, or what consent means, or how to identify a black-legged tick, or what you should do when you go out into the woods and go for a walk. There's no information out there on a commercial, not one. And yet we hear it's, oh, we were going to yell if you, well, yeah, I'm going to yell because you're spending all kinds of millions of dollars on partisan advertisements. Mr. Speaker, if diagnosis and treatment are not immediate, patients are left dealing with a long list of debilitating symptoms, including arthritis and neurological symptoms. Now, 50 diagnoses may not seem like a lot to the crowd across the way, but that disease severely impacts lives. And veterinarians are well informed about this disease. What is the minister going to do to ensure
Order.
doctors know more?
Well, I must say that we, got to about 11 questions today because of the lengths of the questions on answers and questions. So it's not a very good average of 11 questions on all sides of the House. So if we could kind of shorten those answers and questions maybe down to a minute each, we sure would get along and get a lot more questions. Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to draw the attention of the members to the West Gallery and to a very special visitor who is visiting us today from North Sydney. She's here with an important job, and that is to keep an eye on her dad, but I will add not only her dad, but on all members of the legislature in the last hour. And that is the daughter of the member for Cape Breton North, Miss Bria Orrell, and I hope all members give her a warm welcome.
We welcome all our guests to the galleries. Now I will recognize the government host leader to call government business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call government bills for second reading?
Government bills for second reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 36, the Provincial Court Act?
Bill number 36, the Provincial Court Act. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 36, amendments to the Provincial Court Act, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to speak about this bill. The amendments being proposed in this bill, Mr. Speaker, result from recommendations found in the Nova Scotia Provincial Judges Salaries and Benefit Tribunal final report made public in July 2012. The tribunal, comprised of 3 members, was established by the legislation to help ensure judicial independence. This is an important democratic principle, Mr. Speaker. Under the Provincial Court Act, a tribunal sets the salary and benefits for provincial and family court judges. Government is required under legislation to act on the tribunal's recommendations. Hence the need, Mr. Speaker, to introduce the bill to the House. To implement the tribunal's recommendations with respect to the judges' pensions, amendments to the Provincial Court Acts are necessary. In its report, Mr. Speaker, the tribunal recommended that judges keep the pension benefits they had before changes were made in 2010. Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the Public Service Superannuation Plan, to which judges belong, was amended to change the way pensions benefits are calculated and indexed. The tribunal reports also recommend that the future pension indexing should be decided by the tribunal. Mr. Speaker, I respect the decision made by the independent tribunal. Their decision impacts some of the most important members of our judicial system, of our justice system, provincial and family court judges. Mr. Speaker, judges play a critical role in the administration of justice in Nova Scotia. Their work contributes to the overall efforts to ensure peaceful, safe, and secure communities. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, the amendments brought forth today are required under the law and address recommendations made in the tribunal's binding report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise as a justice critic for the official opposition to speak to Bill number 36, the Provincial Court amended. And obviously, Speaker, we respect the work of the independent tribunal and the recommended changes that have been put in place here. Mr. Speaker, anytime we have a bill that's dealing with our justice system, and as the Minister acknowledged, the administration of justice, it does give us a chance to reflect a bit on our justice system and concerns that may exist within it. And how timely that we would be having debate on Bill number 36 today, the same day where Nova Scotians are starting to question the administration of justice in this province after a few very high-profile cases. As Speaker, I think all Nova Scotians are familiar now with the Parsons case and the very troubling information that has come out of that, the troubling behavior that has been alleged in that incident, and the fact that many are asking, what exactly went on with our law enforcement agencies and reviewing this matter, and exactly how did it get to where it got to. Mr. Speaker, as well, the other major case in front of us, in fact, there's a number of them, but one that's certainly very timely is the Fenwick-McIntosh case. Mr. Speaker, I've renewed my calls today on behalf of the victims, on behalf of Nova Scotians, that the province of Nova Scotia show leadership and immediately call a public inquiry into this matter. Speaker, as I have indicated, our hearts go out to the victims. One cannot imagine what they have been put through. They have been victims of crime. And then when finally this matter went to court, when Mr. McIntosh had his day in court, he was found guilty of those crimes. And yet at the end of the day, the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal came in December of 2011 and said his rights to a speedy trial were infringed. Therefore, regardless of his guilt, they dismissed the convictions. Mr. Speaker, on that day that happened, I stood in this House and I called upon the Minister of Justice and Attorney General to start some sort of a review of this matter. Typically, as to be expected, the Minister said, well, because this might be appealed, I can't do anything. Today, we're being told by the Minister that there is some sort of a review going on in the Public Prosecution Service, an internal review of the Public Prosecution Service reviewing itself, which begs the question, why could this not have been started in December 2011? How could that in any way have prejudiced the appeal going to the Supreme Court of Canada? We all know that it wouldn't have. But it was once again an example where this government, rather than leading, chose to drag its feet and to tell the victims, wait a little longer, and to allow the victims to once again pin their hopes on the Supreme Court of Canada, that maybe somehow the Supreme Court would uphold these convictions. Mr. Speaker, I have to say, as someone who works within the justice system and as a Nova Scotian's elected official, I don't think I could be more embarrassed by what the Supreme Court of Canada ruled. Not that the Supreme Court wasn't within its rights, but as a Nova Scotian, I'm embarrassed, and we all should be embarrassed. The fact that when the Crown, on behalf of Nova Scotia, had to stand there and basically be ridiculed by the justices of the Supreme Court for the delays and the bungling that took place. The fact that Supreme Court justices didn't even ask the defense to stand and present their case. They took a break and came back and dismissed the appeal. I believe one of the commentators that was there said that it was almost painful to watch the Crown attorney from Nova Scotia trying to justify the delays that took place in this matter. And I tell you again, we should all be embarrassed as Nova Scotians. But we shouldn't stop at that. It's one thing to say we're embarrassed by it. The question is, what can we do about it? What can we do to make sure this never happens again? Because, Mr. Speaker, the message in Fenwick McIntosh's case is very simple. Run away to another country, and Nova Scotia and Canada will take years before they even bring you back. What a terrible message to give when we know the priority that we all place on anyone who sexually abuses a child. But in this case, Mr. McIntosh, convicted by our courts, walks free because our system of justice somehow didn't get it right. Mr. Speaker, we can stand in this House and say, well, there was extradition that was to blame, and I don't for 1 minute say that that wasn't a problem. And we need to find the answers as to what went wrong there. And that would take some efforts by our federal colleagues. But as far as the investigation of the complainants, the laying of charges, all of that work came from Nova Scotia, not from the federal government. For the Premier to say, I'm going to wait to get an official letter from the Federal Minister of Justice saying they will not do a review or an investigation before I'm prepared to act, is unacceptable. It's a lack of leadership, it's a lack of compassion for the victims, and it's a lack of sending the message to Nova Scotians that your confidence in our justice system has been shaken, and I'm going to undertake everything I can to restore it. That is what we would expect from the Premier. I would submit to you, and anyone on the government side who disagrees is welcome to disagree, that had the Premier been sitting as the Leader of Official Opposition when this happened, he would have been the first to call for a public inquiry, independent public inquiry in this matter. But today, I have to say, he used one word that deep down I know in government's always a concern, but I never thought I would hear the Premier say it in this House regarding the Fenwick McIntosh case. And that word, Madam Speaker, very simple, 4-letter word. The word was cost. That one of his major concerns was the cost of an inquiry. Madam Speaker, when we have a government that stands in this House and says, when it comes to the Nova Scotians having confidence in their system of justice, where victims of sexual abuse are to have confidence that the system is working, that at the end of the day, in all of the calculations for the Premier, cost is a major consideration. I would submit to you, and the Premier sat on this side of the House as Leader of the Official Opposition, when it came to making sure that justice was seen to be done and that our system of justice was seen to be working, that cost never crossed his mind. But today it does. And for the victims today, have no doubt that the government now sees this matter as a financial cost to the province, rather than ensuring that we find out what happened, what went wrong, more importantly, what changes can we make to ensure this never happens again. Madam Speaker, I have to say that I'm not sure if the Premier and his government fully appreciate how the Fenwick-McIntosh case will go down in history in Nova Scotia as a black mark against our province. Because if they did, I believe they'd want to take action much more efficiently to deal with this matter. Yet what we're told is the Minister of Justice is waiting for a review within the Public Prosecution Service. Our review, we're not sure when it was started. If it started last week, a week before, if it's underway some time. We're not sure who's doing the review. I believe the Director of Public Prosecution indicated a review is being done, but those details haven't been provided. And when I asked the Premier while the Minister of Justice was in Ottawa, I should say, he indicated that he wasn't sure if they'd make that review public. Maybe in his closing comments, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General can advise Nova Scotians whether he will make public the review he has referred to that is taking place within the Department, the Public Prosecution Service in Nova Scotia. But the Premier wasn't sure. He didn't say no. Let me be clear. He didn't refuse, but he wasn't sure if that was possible, and maybe the Minister can further elaborate. And, Madam Speaker, it was interesting to hear the Premier today refer to who was in government in Ottawa at a specific time. You know, I thought that was sad to hear the Premier getting into politics when it comes to a question of administration of justice. Because we've said all along that we realize the Minister of Justice today was not the Minister of Justice when the McIntosh case started, when the charges were laid. He wasn't even elected. So I don't blame him for that. I don't blame his government. We're not here to apportion blame. We're here to find out what went wrong. And the only people that can start that process is the government of the day. Yet somehow the NDP have interpreted this to mean that it's an attack against them personally, that somehow they are to blame. And that's the way they've treated this file and so many other files, that somehow they are to blame. No one has suggested that. But when you're in government and a wrong has taken place in the past, it is up to you to undertake the steps to correct that wrong. Yet this government has chosen not to do so. Let's talk about the Home for Coloured Children. A government that has dragged its feet for years on this matter, in the throne speech, indicated it was a priority. Yet today, we started on March 28th, if I'm not mistaken. We're almost 1 month in, and we have yet to hear any details as to how this government intends to proceed with some type of public review of what happened to the Home for Coloured Children. Madam Speaker, when we talk about Bill 36 and the administration of justice and the role that judges play in that, we also can talk about the Nicole Ryan case. Another very public case in Nova Scotia that made national news. And yet, the Minister of Justice again said he's happy with a review being done by the RCMP. That's enough. Again, at a time when Nova Scotians are questioning our justice system, the administration of our justice system, whether it's well functioning from the police to the Crown to our judges, again, the Minister is happy to sit back and wait at a time when Nova Scotians are crying out for leadership. Madam Speaker, as well, when we talk about the administration of justice and we talk about Bill 36 and the impact it will have on the judges of this province, I can't help but as well raise the issue of the court challenge that's being brought forward by the Fédération Acadienne de Nouvelle-Écosse regarding this government's heavy-handed tactics in establishing electoral boundaries in this province, which eliminated the protected ridings that existed. You know, and I have to tell you, I'd invite the Minister of Justice to come down to Richmond, Clare, and Argyll to give the speech he's given us about the fact that those ridings are still intact. I would hope he would come down and speak with the Acadian groups in those areas and tell them a right that they fought for years, that was granted to them by this province and taken away by this government, that somehow they should be satisfied with this government's actions. As if it wasn't bad enough, when the Fédération Acadienne de Nouvelle-Écosse asked to have the matter heard in French, the Minister of Justice said no. And it was interesting, because during estimates, when I asked the Minister of Justice, why would you not agree to have it heard in French, his answer was, it will cost too much. Now, Madam Speaker, we've heard ministers, when it's come to the rights of Acadians in this province, use that answer before. And so I naturally asked the Minister of Justice, how much? It's too much. If you're going to say it's going to cost too much, what is the figure? Is it $100? Is it thousands? Is it millions? What is it? And sadly, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Justice had no answer. He could not justify his own answer. When the minister tells you it's going to cost, we would not allow the proceeding to be heard in French at the request of Fédération Acadienne Nouvelle-Écosse because it would cost too much. And then when you ask the minister, how would it cost too much, and he can't answer that, you know, Madam Speaker, it again brings into question our administration of justice and how our courts are handled, because with Bill 36, we're talking about, in many ways, remuneration of our judges in this province. And you would know, Madam Speaker, that we have a number of judges that can hear matters in French. And in fact, under our criminal system, judges, you do have the right, under our criminal system, to ask for your matter to be heard in French. And as a result of that, we do have very competent and capable judges in Nova Scotia that can speak French. And those judges are directly impacted by Bill 36, which we're debating here today, because it goes down to the question of remuneration, and it goes down to the question of having an independent judiciary that is working separate from the legislative branch, separate from the executive branch of government, and is able to do so without interference taking place, especially on the question of their remuneration. So obviously, Madam Speaker, when we're looking at this bill today, it does help bring into question some of the issues which are being faced by the judges of this province. Because at the end of the day, it would appear that we do have, within the Public Prosecution Service, already on the payroll, lawyers that can speak French. So when the minister indicated that it would cost too much, one again has to call into question how that statement can be made without further information being given. So in following up on that, Madam Speaker, in talking about our justice system and our judges, one of the second request made by Fédération Acadienne Nouvelle-Écosse was whether the province would agree to submit the question to Nova Scotia Supreme Court as a constitutional question. They have requested that. Minister of Justice said no. We're not prepared to submit it as a question. Haven't really been given an answer as to why we would not go directly to that step. And when we're left to wonder, is it for political purposes that the government doesn't want to see this matter dealt with by our courts, dealt with by our judges? Because the Fédération Acadienne has argued, and will continue to argue, that the protected ridings listed in Nova Scotia were a right under the minority languages provisions of our Charter of Rights. So why the province would not agree, especially in this case, one could argue would actually save the province money by going directly and submitting the question to the court. But instead, we're going to go through a more arduous process, which I would submit could potentially cost the government more. So again, one is left to wonder, when we talk about Bill 36 ensuring the independence of judiciary, in this case, whether the Minister of Justice isn't somehow interfering in having this matter heard by not allowing the very reasonable requests which have been made by la Fédération Acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Madam Speaker, again, it is imperative in a well-functioning democracy that your legislative, executive, and judicial branches are all working as they should work. Bill 36 is an important bill into ensuring the independence of the judiciary here in Nova Scotia. But I would submit again that when we're talking about this, that there is some concern, and I'm sure the Minister of Justice would be aware, about the caseload that's being carried by Crown prosecutors here in Nova Scotia. And I know on the issue of the remuneration that is something that they, as an organization, that they have raised with the minister as well. But when we're talking about Bill 36 and issues around remuneration for judges, we must also be mindful of the fact that there have been very serious concerns raised with just how long it takes to get a matter heard in Nova Scotia. When you look at some of the criminal matters where a charge can be laid and before it gets to court, you're talking months, in some cases years, it really does go down to the question of is our administration of justice working in a timely fashion? And that, Madam Speaker, the Fenwick-McIntosh case is the extreme example of the justice system going wrong. But we see more and more within our day-to-day justice system where defense lawyers are bringing forward the argument that the matter was not heard in a timely fashion. That, for us as elected members, needs to be a concern both for the accused and for the victim. Because the outcome of the McIntosh case, where someone who was duly found guilty by a court is later thrown out because the system didn't work properly, has to be setting off alarm bells for all of us, and especially the Minister of Justice. And I would certainly hope, Madam Speaker, as we continue debate on Bill number 36 and as it moves forward, that the government will reflect on the fact that Nova Scotians, the victims of Mr. McIntosh, are crying out for action and are crying out for leadership. They want the government, they want all of us to help restore confidence in the justice system. We can only do that if a process that is clearly independent, that is viewed as fair, that is viewed as examining all of the issues necessary, is carried out. Again, I reiterate, we are not saying that it was this government that was responsible for what happened with Mr. McIntosh. What we are saying is, due to the fact they are here today, they are the ones that can start correcting that wrong. We cannot do it for them. It calls for leadership, leadership from the Premier, leadership from the Minister of Justice, leadership from this government, both for the victims, for their families, and for all Nova Scotians. And Madam Speaker, I certainly hope before this House rises that we will see an example of that leadership. Merci.
Hear, hear. Thank you. Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice. It will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I normally would just like to say move the second reading, but I do want to comment on a couple of things by the member over there. I just want to reiterate to all those victims that I understand the conflict they're in, and to be on a journey where you come forward believing that your voice would be heard. As the Minister of Justice, I sincerely acknowledge the pain and suffering that you're going through and that you've gone through in this system. Am I happy what happened in the past? No. Will we get answers to look to prove the system? Absolutely. Something that should be noted, though, and I had the pleasure yesterday of speaking with the Federal Minister of Justice, and he clearly pointed out to me that when they came into power in 2006, that issue was moved forward quickly by their department. In any case, in the future will be moved forward. The same within the Department of Justice here in Nova Scotia. Since coming into office in 2009, I made a commitment, and I am committed to assuring the expediency of justice and the fairness of justice. I do take exception when the opposition tries to politicize that. We should be both working together to try and see how we make this system better, instead of attacking it on political terms. It is so sad from where I sit, and spending a lifetime as an investigator and dealing with crimes such as this, to have the opposition to be so critical of the system overall. And I think it's important to question the system and to look how we work together, but not to have that belief. I also want to just switch and not dwell on that, but I know that the member there doesn't have a whole lot of respect for the police or the public prosecution. or the court process. This bill has to do with the pension and the budget, but their position and that member's position has been consistent in here. So I know, I hear it from police officers across the force. I'm hearing it on a regular basis, how saddened and how hurt they are by the opposition and by that member's attack continually at every chance that they can. And it deeply roots the underlying spirit of the officers that do good work each and every day. And I feel it is my responsibility to voice that and for him to understand that. Take a shot on the issue and work with me to improve that. I am committed to addressing such issues and harms that have been done to the atrocities to those people that have been victimized and abused. And I'm committed to that. I want to just talk briefly on the Acadian. There is no change in the opportunity for our Acadian voice to be heard. The ridings are still there. I am committed to enhancing the quality of French language in this province and the voice of Acadians and the Acadian culture. That has not wavered and that should not change. And that member tries to politicize that and divide our communities. Our communities should be unified and we work together on the issue of whether someone has the right to take something to court. I fully support that, and that group can take their matter to court, and I respect that, and I respect the court position and the fairness of that, and they have that right, and I look forward to them taking their case and hearing the result, and I will respect the court's decision, and I will not divide people based on language or culture. I respect it and hope that we enrich our society and enrich our community, and I move the second reading of this, and thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The question is for second reading of Bill number 36. Is the House ready for the question? All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 36, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 238 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Provincial Court Act.
Ordered that Bill number 36, the Provincial Court Act, be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill 37, the Innovative Transportation Act.
Now call Bill number 37, the Innovation Transportation Act. I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 37, the Innovative Transportation Act, be now read a second time. And thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my privilege to rise today to talk about
Order,
this bill.
please. The chatter is a little high. It's difficult to hear the minister even here directly beside me. If perhaps people could order. I'm asking that the side conversations just be lowered a little or taken outside the chamber. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is my privilege to rise today to talk about this bill. It's an important bill, Madam Speaker, that increases our flexibility in trying out new approaches to safely using our highways. Bill 37, the Innovative Transportation Act, enables the province to allow pilot projects involving our transportation system that otherwise would not be permitted under by the Motor Vehicle Act. But rest assured, Madam Speaker, this is not a matter of ask for a pilot project and ye shall receive. Before a project is brought forward, it will be thoroughly reviewed by the department staff. The staff of all road users in Nova Scotia will always be, the safety of all road users in Nova Scotia will always be the prime concern. And, Madam Speaker, approval will not be a rubber stamp. We have a responsibility to Nova Scotians to make sure the tests we oversee will be reasonable and safe. Madam Speaker, we take that responsibility very seriously. The Innovative Transportation Act gives us another tool, Madam Speaker, to help us make the safest possible choice for Nova Scotians. Typically, when we consider new products or new rules or new ideas for our highways, we look at what has been done in other jurisdictions. That's a great place to start, but as we all know, Nova Scotia is a unique combination of topography and history. Something that works in the wide open spaces out west may not be as successful here, where our roads have a few more turns and many of our streets were laid out before the birth of the automobile. The Innovative Transportation Act, Madam Speaker, gives us up to 2 years to make sure a proposed change is the right one for Nova Scotia. The current version of the Motor Vehicle Act dates back to 1932 and is very far-reaching, Madam Speaker. Under the Act, a highway is a street, a lane, a road, an alley, a park, a beach, or a bridge. It even has some control over private property if that private property is available to the general public for the operation of a motor vehicle. This could include some parking lots as well. Right now, the only way to test something that violates the Motor Vehicle Act is to amend the Act. Let's say, Madam Speaker, cyclists wanted to ride their bikes on Granville Street in the opposite direction of traffic. They can't do that now because riding the wrong way in a one-way street is against the law. Therefore, Madam Speaker, we would have to go through the long process of amending the Motor Vehicle Act to allow that to happen. Once this Innovative Transportation Act is in place, a change like that can be considered and evaluated for a 2-year trial period in a much more timely fashion. It's not just the rules of the road that we're talking about here, Madam Speaker, but what operates on the roads as well. It's difficult to be specific because technology is changing almost as fast as we can imagine it. We already have cars that can park themselves. What about cars that can drive themselves? That may not be that far away. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotians want to be ready to move quickly when these new ideas come knocking. Bill 37, the Innovative Transportation Act, is what will help us be there. Thank you.
Before I recognize the honourable member, there's been a request for an introduction. I would now recognize the honourable Minister of Economic Development and Economic and Rural Development and Tourism on an introduction, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, with your permission, I'd like to bring the attention of the House to the East Gallery. I'm going to say we are blessed this afternoon to have in the East Gallery a very prominent Haligonian. And also, you can tell by some of the apparel that he has on that he cheers for the right team in the National Hockey League. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Mo Hickey.
Welcome all our visitors to the gallery today. Hope you enjoyed today's proceedings. Now recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to say a few words on Bill number 37, Innovative Transportation Act. Madam Speaker, this piece of legislation, as the Minister pointed out in his opening comments, will allow our province to have more flexibility to respond to testing and evaluating new innovative modes of transportation on our highways. Madam Speaker, who knows what kind of new innovative transportation vehicles the future may bring. Apparently, as we've heard, the current Motor Vehicle Act does not allow for some pilot projects. So this bill, Madam Speaker, will allow pilot projects to be authorized for new innovative modes of transportation. And again, Madam Speaker, anything we can do in order to increase innovation transportation is a positive step. So on behalf of the Liberal caucus, we support this bill to go through second reading and allow this bill to go to law amendments. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and just happy to stand for a moment to speak on this bill. This is something similar to what our caucus here put forward back a while ago with regards, at that point it was to segways and allowing them to drive, and we've seen a bit of that here in the province and certainly in Windsor. I saw one the other day actually going up the sidewalk. I haven't tried one yet, but they look like they may be interesting. I look forward to trying one at some point, and I'm sure I'll get the opportunity. But I think this bill is a great opportunity for not only segways, but for others, as mentioned in the bill. And I think we might be an area that's interested in the pilot project. I know that Council has met with the folks that operate the Segway as an example, and I think that they favor that opportunity, and we look forward to what this might present going into the future. So with those few words, thank you very much.
Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation. Oh, sorry. I recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I just want to say a few words on this bill. I know I want to thank the Minister of Transportation for bringing this bill forward. This is something that, in particular, the constituent in Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville met with me several times on this important issue about, in particular, as a member from Hants West talked about around segways. Max Rosatili. They have a company known as Segway Nova Scotia, and this is something that they've been pushing for, and so this is a good step forward for sure. In particular, allowing a 2-year pilot project for specific areas in the province, allowing segways to come again for that particular product to be used in different areas across the province. And I know as a member from Hants West also mentioned, I know the town of Windsor, and I believe also some areas outlying Wolfville are interested in setting up tours for the wineries as well. And I think I read in the paper the other day, Madam Speaker, that along the waterfront, in fact, the Waterfront Development Corporation, I think, is working with Segways Nova Scotia to allow segways to be used along our waterfront. So this is a very good bill, and I want to put on the record, I know that the Minister and his staff and myself and some other representatives from organizations across the province have met several times, and I want to thank him and his staff for drafting this piece of legislation. Segways, in particular, are used in various jurisdictions across North America and, in fact, around the world. But I know some jurisdictions have implemented the use and allowed the use of segways. I know a few jurisdictions across the country, across Canada, have done so as well. And as I said, this is a great amendment and a good bill for this province. So, with that, Madam Speaker, I'll take my place.
Now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm very pleased to speak on this bill, as there have been actually not only segways but a number of other experimental vehicles which have been posited in my constituency. I guess I'd just like to make one very quick note. I've never been on a Segway, but I have some familiarity with it. Well, I guess I should probably say because one of my cousins was the lead designer on it, but it's very, very important, and I sincerely hope that helmets will be a very significant part of this, because there have been injuries associated with Segways, and there have been head injuries, so I would feel that I really was remiss if I didn't make that point right now. Thank you very much.
Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. It will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the colleagues on this side of the House, certainly, and the members of the opposition and the third party for their kind words and support for the bill. Having said that, Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 37, the Innovation Transportation Act, now be read a second time.
The question is for second reading of Bill number 37 in the Innovative Transportation Act. Is the House ready for the question? All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 37, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act, respecting innovative transportation.
Ordered that Bill number 37 be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill 42, the Pension Benefits Act?
Now call Bill number 42. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education to move second reading.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to move second reading of Bill 42, amendments to the Pensions Benefits Act. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to speak to this legislation that will make life better for Nova Scotian families by protecting the interests of couples who are not married. Right now, the Pension Benefits Act has a broad definition of spouse, which includes common law spouses, same-sex couples. This change will make sure that includes people who are living together but not married. Madam Speaker. For people who are living with each other, Speaker, the new Pensions Act will use the same criteria as CPP, or as we know it, Canada Pension Plan. A couple will only have to live together for 1 year in order to be entitled to pension, or at least 3 years if either of them is married to somebody else. The 3-year time frame gives people time to resolve any legal issues associated with getting a divorce or separation. Speaker, in the new act, which is not yet proclaimed, we had a heading that talked about the division of pension benefits on marriage breakdown. We've changed that to relationship breakdown, so we can extend the division of pension benefits to people who live together as well as those who are married to one another, Madam Speaker. Other changes that are in the bill are strictly housekeeping changes that clear up the cross-references that we had noticed after the Pensions Act was passed in December of 2011, Speaker. So, Speaker, the Department is continuing to work on regulations for this statute, and we anticipate that it would be proclaimed later this year. Thank you.
Now recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his comments. The changes that are outlined in this bill are in line with the beliefs of this caucus. We support having access to pension benefits and want to assure that all people can retire in security, and we will be supporting this piece of legislation.
Thank you. Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. It will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the members for supporting this bill, and I move second reading of Bill 42.
Question is for second reading of Bill number 42, the Pensions Benefit Act. All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 42, titled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2011, the Pension Benefits Act.
Good job.
Ordered that Bill number 42 be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 54, the Widows Pension Act?
Now call Bill number 54, the Widows Pension Act. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise very proudly today to move second reading of Bill 54, the Widows Pension Act. Speaker, this legislation will reimburse more than 100 Nova Scotian women whose husbands died as a result of workplace accidents and were denied benefits because they had remarried before April 17, 1985. This is when the Equal Rights section of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came into effect, Speaker, ensuring women could no longer be discriminated against based on their marital status. Every woman whose husband is killed on the job should be treated fairly and compensated properly. In the past, this didn't happen. That wasn't acceptable to our government, and we're doing something about it, and we're doing the right thing today, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, for years, women were denied their spouses' benefits once they remarried. While this was addressed with change to the Charter, not all widows have been compensated for these unpaid benefits. In '99, the government at the time passed Bill 90 to ensure all widows who remarried after April 17, 1985 continued to receive their benefits retroactive to the date of their remarriages. But those widows who remarried before April 17, 1985 were left behind. They've been compensated retroactive 1999, not to 1985, as we believe they should have been. Speaker, I'm introducing this legislation today that will reimburse these widows for the benefits they should have received between those years in particular, 1985 to 1999. Mr. Speaker, I would be extremely remiss if I was to speak about this bill and not to include the champion of this bill, to which I often say this should have been called the Bauman Bill, Madam Speaker. This person was Betty Bauman from Glace Bay, who had lost her husband in a coal mine in 1960, leaving her at the age of 26 alone with 3 young daughters. For years, Betty and many other widows in her shoes across this province have been working relentlessly to make this happen. For these women, this issue was more than just about fighting to see whether this would be held up in court. It has been an issue of fairness. And denying these women their rights any longer would just not be tolerable, Madam Speaker. Again, this legislation reimbursed this group of widows for the benefits they were denied when they were remarried. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Now recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased today to rise and speak to the bill. And I want to first thank the Deputy Premier for bringing this bill forward. And as he said, Betty Bauman was certainly one of the champions that led the charge on the bill. I had just barely arrived here at Province House in 2003, and I met Betty and a contingent of ladies who, in fact, explained very, very well the whole case that they had won in provincial court, only to have it overturned as the government of the day supported the WCB in moving this to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. So these women like Betty, and I guess for me, having entered a bill at least on 5 occasions, Shirley Shore became the face of this bill for me. She is a constituent, and I started to call the bill, in fact, wrongly in some ways, but I called it the Spring Hill Widows Minors Bill, and because it did affect many of those. But as the Deputy Premier pointed out today, it is those widows who were affected by their husbands having died in a workplace accident. So it really does, in fact, right a wrong where in 1985, with the advance of the Charter, these women now had every right to have benefits from that point onward, but that did not happen. And Shirley was one of the people that kept reminding me that no matter how many years you move along, it's important to right a wrong. And in this case, the wrong, of course, will not benefit a number of women, because when I first met with their lawyer, Scott Stern, and 5 widows, there were about 140 women who could have received benefits from this provision that they were denied because they married after their husbands had been accidentally killed prior to 1985. And so Shirley, in fact, was just 21. Sorry, her husband, Victor, was 21, and Shirley was 18, and they had just their first son, Tom, of 10 months. And we all know what many of them went through in those years. And in fact, many of them who could have received those benefits, it certainly could have improved their quality of life. And today, with 109 now through the passing of this bill, that those benefits will come their way. So once again, I'm pleased that government is moving this forward and correcting a wrong that's been inflicted on those women, no fault of their own, and they will now reap those benefits. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I see the lights on there now. Pleased to rise today to speak for just a moment or two as well in support of this bill, and thank the Deputy Premier for bringing it forward. Obviously something very much needed, and it's It's reflective of some other things, I guess. When we think about workplace safety in general, we know it's that time of year we're celebrating, I shouldn't say celebrating, I guess we celebrate to some degree the lives of those that we have lost in an upcoming walk that some of us, maybe I know I'll be taking part in May, and it's called Steps for Life, and that's a spin-off of some other things that go on. But it's a shame that we still encounter workplace safety, but these measures that are being put forward are to protect the widows only in the past, and I guess going forward making sure that we're doing the right thing as well. So this is something that this caucus certainly supports wholeheartedly. So with those few words, thank you very much.
Thank you. If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education, it will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In a short closing, Madam Speaker, as someone who's known from time to time to be combative with other members in the House, I really want to tell everybody in this House that while I'm particularly proud to sponsor this bill, I appreciate every colleague in this House and the good things they've either said on the record or said personally to myself, because this is, you know, every once in a while, we should all rise above and just do the right thing. And it's not about somebody who didn't do something or somebody that did something in the past. This is one of those moments that I think we all look through our own mother's eyes on this one and say this is the right thing to do. So I really, really do appreciate whether it's the intervention on the floor here or the kind words that were said, not so much even to me, but to the widows that were here last Friday. It means a lot to them. Madam Speaker, it is with much delight that I move second reading of Bill 54.
The question is for second reading of Bill number 54, the Widows Pension Act. All in favour say aye. Opposed, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 54, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Workers' Compensation Act, to extend pension entitlement to more workers' widows.
Ordered that Bill number 54, the Widows Pension Act, be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill 55, the Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act?
I now, excuse me, I now call Bill number 55, the Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act. Now recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that Bill number 55, the Animal Protection Act, be now read for a second time, also known as the Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to stand here today before my colleagues in this House and ask them to support amendments to the Animal Protection Act. As Nova Scotia's Minister of Agriculture, I'm bringing forward legislation that will increase animal protection here in this province. The message we want to get out there is that abusing animals is wrong and will not be tolerated. That's the message I stressed earlier this week when I introduced these amendments to the Animal Protection Act at a bill briefing hosted by the Ainsleys at the Fairview Animal Hospital and attended by the Nova Scotia SPCA. The event was perfect. Madam Speaker, we know that Nova Scotians are angered and upset by stories of animal cruelty and abuse because pets are part of our families. And that is why we first started making changes to the Act in 2009 at the beginning of our mandate. Now we're going even further. With these amendments, we will be able to accomplish a number of things, Madam Speaker. Firstly, we are increasing maximum penalties for those who abuse animals to make them among the stiffest in the country. The maximum fines will now range from up to $25,000 for a first offence to as much as $75,000 for a third offence. Previously, penalties ranged from $10,000 to $50,000. Secondly, we are clarifying and expanding the definition of what constitutes distress for an animal. The definition now makes reference to anxiety. It also includes situations where animals are kept in conditions that are unsanitary or that will significantly impair an animal's health or well-being over time. This change will make it easier for SPCA investigators to do their job. Thirdly, Madam Speaker, we are also setting the stage for effective regulations by clarifying the regulatory authority of the Minister. These changes will allow me to develop effective regulations with respect to the standards of care for animals. This includes physical shelters such as dog houses, animal restraints, and tethers. And finally, in an effort to put an end to puppy mills, these amendments will make it an offense to sell a dog commercially that has not been certified by a veterinarian. This step, the first of its kind in the country, is an additional tool that will help address the issue of puppy mills and focuses on sellers that are not ensuring the health and protection of their animals. And I just want to speak to that for a minute, Madam Speaker. It probably isn't as much an issue as the number of animals that are sold, but the health of the animals that are sold. And therefore, we want to ensure that when people pick up their puppy from whomever, that it's accompanied by a document from a veterinarian that indicates that that pup is in good health, Madam Speaker. Puppy mills are one of the most upsetting issues when it comes to animal protection, and Nova Scotians I talk to don't understand how anyone can be so heartless and cruel to allow animals to be raised in unsafe, unhealthy conditions, and that's why we're taking this action. And I'm pleased to note that the Nova Scotia SPCA has applauded our government's commitment to animal welfare, and in particular, the SPCA was pleased to see a reference to animal anxiety as part of a broader definition of stress in our proposed amendments. The SPCA described our amendments as promising, and I'll just quote from the statement. The SPCA applauds government's commitment to animal welfare as we appreciate that they have been open to our input. It is clear that government views the SPCA as an integral partner and stakeholder in this process. And Madam Speaker, that is from Kristen Williams, the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia SPCA. Mr. Speaker, by increasing penalties, expanding the definition of distress for animals, clarifying the regulation-making authority of the Minister, and making veterinary certification a prerequisite for selling a dog, I believe the proposed amendments I have just described will further strengthen protection for animals here in Nova Scotia. And Madam Speaker, I just want to, I don't know if I will enlighten members opposite much. They may already know this. The first real change to the Animal Protection Act, or I should say perhaps introduction of the Act, was in 1996. By the honourable member from Clare when he was the Minister of Agriculture and Minister for Agriculture and Marketing at the time in Nova Scotia. And he, or I should say his government at the time, brought in changes to the Act, and the Act had been in place since 1877. And really charges could only be laid under the criminal code at that time. So the government moved actually after and actually referred to as the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty, so the SPC, actually brought draft legislation to the government and asked them to implement this legislation. So the powers that we see of the SPCA for investigation of cruelty complaints was initiated by them to the government asking for that power, Madam Speaker. It wasn't something downloaded by the government onto them. So I look forward to the comments by my colleagues opposite. I think this is truly great legislation that should allay the concerns of people who are very concerned about the health and welfare of pets in our province. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I'll listen to the interventions of my colleagues. Thank you.
Now recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And pleased today to make some comments on this important piece of legislation, Bill number 55, Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act. And I think there's a couple of things that do need to be pointed out and talked about and deliberated about in this House in regards to this piece of legislation. Just a few years ago, a bill came before the Nova Scotia Legislature, the Animal Protection Act. And it was a long time in the making. And there was a lot of interventions, a lot of submissions and draft comments. And at that time, in fact, we looked at legislation, and I know my colleague from Halifax Clayton Park did quite a study on what was happening in other jurisdictions, especially BC, in Surrey, jurisdictions in the U.S., on how we could strengthen the Animal Protection Act so that the welfare of our pets could be safeguarded to a much greater degree. Because that act separated agricultural animals and companion or our pets. And I know at the time there were a couple of pretty significant incidents involving agricultural animals, and in fact it may have been one of the precipitating reasons as to why the government of the day, the Conservative government, started to take a look at a stronger piece of legislation. But equally important was to make sure that our pets, our companion animals in Nova Scotia, were able to be safeguarded through legislation. Now, there is a whole debate around, in fact, that perhaps the Act as it stands could have, in fact, prevented some of the cruelty that we have seen over, again, the last 3 or 4 years. Because the Act does have provisions for steps to be taken when we know animals are being abused. But that clause or the legislative piece which talked about animals under distress seemed to be so wide that there didn't seem to be enough specific and direct interpretation to allow whether it be animal control officers, the SPCA, or other concerned citizen groups to be able to make the kind of investigation and then the conviction that needed to be done. And so that's what I believe in the last 3-4 years, a number of groups have started this process and wanted government to come forward with legislation that would be stronger, that would be very, very specific, and have direct regulations that would assure Nova Scotians that steps are being taken and there will be the ability to make sure that enforcement and most serious cases prosecution takes place. Now, one of the and in some ways I believe the Act, the original Animal Protection Act, is a good piece of legislation, but I think either for whatever reason the ability for enforcement did not seem to be able to be carried out. And that's where so many of our problems have resulted from. We've had very, very serious cases of animal abuse in this province, and we have people who have been convicted a second and third time. And once again, these people were back on the street, selling dogs in particular, and also with puppy mills still at their disposal. So obviously, we've had a piece of legislation with either loopholes or with perhaps the lack of will to make sure that prosecution did take place. I felt very strongly that, in fact, whether it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or just last year, as the pressure mounted on government to do something around animal abuse in our province, because, the executive body can make changes to regulations and could have, in fact, made some of those changes long before today. However, that has not happened. I firmly believe that when we're talking about, even just here in the legislature, where we had one petition of over 2,000 names, another with about 6,000 names, we know that this is a considerable issue. And we know also, of course, that probably 95 to 98% of people really look after their animals. They are part of the family. And we know that animals can be used in all kinds of therapeutic situations. So truly, they do have a place of higher regard than, however, what some individuals, the treatment of them do occur. So I thought this was one of those perfect opportunities to reach out to thousands of Nova Scotians to hear what they had to say about having stronger measures, measures with the ability for quick interventions to start to take place. And this is where our conclusion in our caucus said, gosh, if voluntary planning were still in place, what a great opportunity to hear from hundreds, and I'm sure we would have heard from thousands of Nova Scotians that would have said, here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that will make a difference immediately and will make a difference in the long term. So I think that may, in fact, still be available to us. It's great to have consulted with some stakeholders, perhaps with a few groups. I know I've had the benefit of a number of groups and individuals who have come to my office to present on this particular issue, and I have learned a great deal from them, and of course I'm hearing from them now around this piece of legislation, because we all know that here in the Assembly we can pass a bill that again has wonderful intentions, the right motivations, and looks like it's going to accomplish a better goal, and in this case a better outcome for the lives of our pets. So that's certainly the hope in the long term, is that the regulations will reflect what literally in this case thousands of Nova Scotians have said things aren't quite right where they are, and they need to be corrected. Now, we know that the SPCA can only go so far if the legislation is not there to allow them to do the kind of investigations the kind of taking an animal that is in distress, that is suffering, that has all of the characteristics of harm being done to it. Neglect, as we know, is one of the big areas. So while there are very good things, strong things that the SPCA carried out, I think that the judgment here will be when this act passes and we see what the SPCA and other groups will be able to do. Because if those, the fines can be strong, but again, if we don't get convictions, then, and those fines will only be perhaps a deterrent to some extent here along the way. So this will be the real test, the acid test for this piece of legislation, because we have cases now where people have been actually convicted 2 or 3 times, and they're still out there selling puppies from a puppy mill. Now, I think one of the very, very big areas that I'm hearing will be very, very difficult to actually enforce. And perhaps as this debate goes along and we get to third reading, perhaps the minister can provide a bit more detail and information around this area. And that is the veterinarian's certification when it comes to the health of the animal that is going to be sold. Because if you take a look every day on Kijiji, you're going to find anywhere from 30 to 50 dogs that are for sale. So, are we going to make the kinds of changes here that will provide the kind of safeguards that we need? So that's certainly a very, very I think challenging area. Those people that that we know well in our communities that breed dogs. We know the kind of care that they provide for their animals, and when we go to those kennels, we know right away, and we see right away the difference of a person in a parking lot with 4 or 5 puppies on the back of their pickup for sale versus those in a kennel. And many of the kennels I know in my area, they don't even need veterinary certification in terms of their being sold. Their owners are doing the right things year after year after year. So I think it's very important that our legislation reflect the challenges that we have around animal abuse and bring in those kinds of corrective measures. It's interesting too, Mr. Speaker, I've heard, Madam Speaker, that I've heard and our caucus has heard from a number of concerned citizens that bring information about the selling that currently goes on, and then when they go to take a look at some of those animals, just for their own proof that in fact all is not well. There are actually people who take the kind of time to identify through a Kijiji sale that in fact an animal is not in good health, and there are all the characteristic signs of abuse. So I'm hoping that the legislation will have the regulation and the strength to be able to deal with those kinds of cases. One of the times of the year that I have heard, and I know a number of my colleagues have heard from Nova Scotians, is during the winter months. Now, we all know that animals that are permanently chained, permanently tethered, there are in fact issues around the behavior of those pets in many instances. So, I think you know, it requires that the legislation allow again the SPCA, those that are going to enforce these regulations, that they be able to deal with an animal who is suffering severe distress. Just having you know, some type, if you wish, of cover and a frozen bowl of water and a food dish only in sight, you know, that just does not pass the test. But up until now, it has indeed passed the test, and there hasn't been the kind of enforcement that is truly needed when abuse is taking place. So if this bill moves in the right direction, then I think it can bring about some of the changes that many Nova Scotians are requesting from this legislature that will be very enabling and provide the ability to intervene, bring in the interventions, so that you know, these animals will no longer be abused. So I you know, again, adding the word anxiety, you know, when characterizing distress is, I think, is a small step forward. But once again, whether it will cover all of the kinds of deplorable conditions and the deteriorating health of an animal that is often seen. I know last year when I brought Shelley Hipson and a few others to meet with the Deputy Minister to get this issue on the books, get it registered with the Minister and the Department. You know, some of the information, some of the photographs, and so on that were brought forward, you know, were really, you know, I guess, you know, the only word you can say is that, you know, quite a emotional response from all of us to think that an animal could be treated this way. So whether this now legislation, again, as I said, is strong enough to change the direction in dealing with abused animals. I stated the other day when interviewed by the media around this issue of second and third time abusers of animals, I believe there should be a ban from those people having animals in the future. I think it now is well entrenched in their behavioral patterns, and that they should be flagged and not have an opportunity in the future for further abuse of animals. So, Madam Speaker, you know, this bill is one that perhaps many of us here in the legislature will speak to, and perhaps like having a ban on the serious abusers. Fortunately, they are only a very small number, but if they're allowed to go on, to continue, have multiple occasions to abuse, we hope that the court system, you know, will do just that. That there will be imprisonment, that there will be a lifetime ban on having, on breeding animals, on selling animals, on having animals in their care to board, and in any way, I don't think they should, in fact, have any opportunity in the future. So You know, I, as I said earlier, and I do need to come back to the fact that, you know, I mean, it is a good measure in the bill to say that that a dog cannot be sold if it's not certified to be in good health by a veterinarian. But, you know, when we look at the way communications have dramatically changed and how the internet, you know, gets information about the sale of animals very quickly in front of people, you know, will that be a realistic, you know, measure to be able to curtail, you know, animals that aren't in good health to be brought forward? Now, one of the areas that I think is a very, very important measure, I think this is going to be the key to the success of this legislation. And I am pleased the minister and his government have finally addressed this issue. This has been too long in a vacuum and too long unattended to by government. But right now, there just simply is not, there are not enough people to be able to enforce perhaps what is already there in the Animal Protection Act. We have to find some way, a concept much like our wardens, and there are a lot of people who will volunteer for this if they were given the kind of status that would allow them not just to tramp across somebody's property, but when they have full information about the abuse of an animal truly in distress, that they would in fact be able to do something about it. And I think when you look at currently, and the minister can correct me, but I think there's really only a couple of officers currently that can actually carry out that kind of work. So having a system in all of our counties where there are people who are qualified, who are identified, who are prepared to volunteer their time. I know many people who certainly invest their own time and finances to currently try to do all they can to stop abuse, to identify it, to report it, all to no avail. If we look at the number of investigations by the SPCA and the number of times any kind of convictions have been carried out, we know that they are very, very few indeed. So I'm hoping that, you know, this is a bill that will go before law amendments, and I think we will hear from some very, very informed people who will come here and will present, I think, further amendments, and certainly will have ideas to strengthen the legislation, to make sure that it can be real and able to be carried out, and advance the cause of animal welfare in our province. And with that, Madam Speaker, I take my place.
Now recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to stand and speak to this bill, Bill number 55, the Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act, for a few moments. It was only last week that I did have the opportunity and the pleasure to introduce a petition in this House signed by over 4,300 people, where the operative line was, of course, to strengthen the laws for animal protection, to provide better work for the organizations that do enforce, better enforcement, so that it doesn't happen that we get to see what we get to see on daily basis in the paper, in the news, in the paper, where we see animals being abused in our province. You know, what came to light over the last number of months, of course, in southwest Nova Scotia is the issue of Mojo. Mojo was a dog that was basically taken from its owner. It was one that had been completely neglected, a puppy who had probably one of the worst cases of mange. Mange, I guess, is a skin condition and bug that gets into the skin and really starts to ravage that dog. And if you saw pictures of the before when the dog was finally surrendered to what the dog was here on the steps of the legislature not so long ago, is a tremendous testament to the people who did pour out their hearts, and not only pour out their hearts, but pour out their money to make sure that that animal got a fair shake in life. Mojo and his owner at this point, Joey Wagner, and his wife from the community, in the communities of Clare near Concession, need full credit for the work they did, because really what happened there, Mr. Speaker, is that the community was aware of a dog that was in a state that needed help. And after a number of phone calls to SPCA, to animal enforcement, there really wasn't any help coming quickly. Apparently, because of the caseload, it would have been some time before either one of those organizations would be able to come and check out the situation, investigate the situation, and maybe seize the animal. Well, time was going on, and the community and those who knew about the animal felt that it had to happen quicker than that, or the dog would probably end up dying. And that is really the case in this one, that another day would have ended up in Mojo's death. So the animal is surrendered in this particular case. The owner, knowing full well that they couldn't do anything for the dog, and they hadn't done anything for the dog, surrendered the animal. It was taken care of by that community. And at this point, has cost Joey and the Hope for Mojo, there's actually a Facebook site for that, it's cost over $6,000. Poor animal had to be shipped to PEI, to the veterinary college. It was the worst case of mange anyone had ever seen in their practice time. But again, today, the animal is where it needs to be. So that did precipitate this petition, and people are still signing it today. As much as I introduced it last week, there's still people signing it, and I'll probably have another opportunity another day to introduce, or at least add more names to the 4,300 people that already did sign it. Madam Speaker, we're having a music chairs at the Speaker's office, in the Speaker's chair right now, but so for those of you who have been listening, I've been sort of referring to Mrs. Speaker and Madam Speaker and Mr. Speaker, so just to make it seem I'm not making a mistake here, as much as it does happen quite a bit in this House. What they called for in the petition was change to the law, and I think what we've seen today are a number of good changes to that law. I think we'll look forward to seeing what those changes are really going to do, but it also provides sweeping power, not sweeping power is the wrong word, but a fair amount of power to the Minister, Executive Council, to make regulations that can be adapted to certain situations. Because what was happening before, they're saying that maybe things were too restrictive, that the Act wasn't allowing them to search and seize and those kinds of things, or even to seize the second animal if they found that the situation warranted it. So these will be things that I think that we'll be watching for to see if it's truly going to provide the change that we need, and I hope it does, because far too often we see these situations. One issue that the member for Kings West brought up a few moments ago too is the issue of enforcement, and the issue of enforcement is not really covered under this particular Act. It is something that the Minister is going to have to come up with a number of solutions to. I know in his scrums and speaking to Joey Wagner, Rhonda Boudreau, those people that came to the House last week, that he felt that there was enough man-woman power there in order to do it, but maybe it was allocated wrong. So let's see if that reallocation of resource can truly make a difference to allow those investigations to continue, to allow seizures to happen, to make sure that animals are being taken care of. Because, I'm a dog owner. I have been for a long time. Our first animal, Boo, her name was, a beautiful little mixed dog of Cocker Spaniel / Nova Scotia Duck Toller. She was a sweetheart of a dog, but after 15 years, she wasn't quite herself anymore. So we did have to make a decision there, which was very difficult, and I need to thank my wife for helping me out with that one, because it probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. But we're so lucky today that we do have another puppy in our lives. I don't know why I make decisions like this, quite honestly, Madam Speaker, because I kind of forgot after 16 years what having a puppy is all about, because it is a fair amount of work. But knowing that I went out, it's kind of funny. I went out looking for a shelter dog and hoping to do a rescue. But quite honestly, as we rolled around, I ended up going to a breeder from Lunenburg County, and a beautiful breeder that had these Entelbucher mountain dogs, and an absolute great breeder who had a wonderful program, has the veterinary oversight on this one, and making sure that when the animal comes to us, that the animal is of good health, good genetics, and all that. So, you know, looking at that side of the act, I think that's also a good move to make sure that that Kijiji thing doesn't continue to happen, that anyone with an animal, with a dog that can be bred, that they just sort of breed it just for the heck of it and hope to make a few dollars on it. And I think that's the wrong avenue for animals in this province. And you know, you really don't know what you're going to be getting in the end. They could be very, very sick to begin with, and might have long-lasting genetic problems that you're going to have to make a bad decision shortly after receiving that animal. So those would be things I think that are I think a good avenue in this act. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that the likes of Mojo don't happen again. I hope the likes of Gail Benoit don't happen again. If we know the news stories that revolve around her lifetime ban in selling animals, but we need to have more opportunity, more enforcement, and I think maybe this might be able to get us there. But again, the allocation of resources is going to be very important to this one as well. So, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this bill.
Now I recognize the honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to speak in support of this bill, Protection of Animal Welfare and Security Act. And I would like to personally thank the Minister McDonnell, the Minister, of Agriculture, for passing this bill, which I think is very important in Nova Scotia. As a dog owner myself, I have 3 actually, and many of my friends have dogs. We felt when this issue first came up that it was an important one for the province to take a look at and to actually move forward on. And it still boggles my mind when I hear stories of abuse towards anybody, people, animals, and it seems strange that we have to actually put these things into writing to look after and protect innocent creatures, but in fact we do. And so it's nice to be able to see that in this bill they are speaking about anxiety and these kinds of things, which are more subtle but are so important as definitions of distress. And it's nice to be able to see as well that Kristen Williams, her comments about the announcement are very positive. Kristen Williams, of course, is the executive director of the SPCA for Nova Scotia, and she has mentioned that she is very keen to assist government in achieving its goals for better protection of the animals, and that she's very pleased to see animal anxiety is included, and also that the SPCA applauds government's commitment to animal welfare and appreciates that we've been open to their input. She says it's clear that government views the SPCA as an integral partner and stakeholder in this process, and that she would also like to personally thank and acknowledge Premier Darrell Dexter, Minister McDonnell, and Deputy Minister Penfound for their accessibility.
Order. I'd like to remind the member that of 2 things, actually. If you're quoting something, we will need you to table it. And secondly, not to use a proper name in the chamber, so I'd ask you to reframe that.
Thank you.
The honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you. Yes, I plan to table this. She had quoted in an announcement, actually, that she would like to personally thank and acknowledge the Premier, the Minister of Agriculture, and also the Deputy Minister of Agriculture for their accessibility and also for their responsiveness. And she says it's very clear to the SPCA that this government has made animal welfare a high priority. And I would like to copy this and table it. Thank you. But in closing, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to make a brief statement here that for the many animal lovers in Nova Scotia and the many of us who have these little creatures as our family, really, some of us aren't lucky enough to have children. We just didn't either have the time or the ability to do so, but we do have animals in our lives. And my 3 little animals, Buster Keaton from Los Angeles, Ruby Dee from Vancouver, and Ayla Sakura from Nova Scotia, are all integral to my well-being and my peace of mind when I come home from the road and from Halifax. So on that note, I say thank you again to the government for passing this bill. Thank you.
Right now. The honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And this is a bill that I think is really important, and it follows some outcry from the public about animal welfare. And I know the minister started by saying one of the first bills brought forward was the new bill on animal protection, which was really needed, absolutely needed. And I remember at the time when we were involved in that and discussing what the points were, it had two points really. One part was very much the farm animals and that aspect, which as a city member, I certainly care about the welfare of animals on farms, but I was less concerned about that because I heard more from people about pets. And I thought that the bill was a little bit shy on the pet side and more heavily weighted towards farm animals, work animals, and so on. And so I knew that there were concerns there around pets and how we were controlling cruelty on that side. And I remember at the time thinking the penalties should be stronger. And in fact, one of the member from Kings West had mentioned that I had done some research at the time. Some jurisdictions put a lifetime ban on owning pets to people who are repeatedly cruel to their animals. And I know we haven't gone that far, but the fines, I was reading, the detail more today for second reading, the fines certainly are significantly higher. You've gone from $10,000 to $25,000 on one category, $25,000 to $50,000. So, and also introducing the possibility of serving jail time if the fines are not paid or people don't take it seriously. So these are more serious penalties, and I think that's important because really and truly some people just don't look after animals, don't recognize the pain and suffering, and they need to be held accountable. And I wanted to say, and one reason why I was so keen to get up and speak a bit on this bill today is to acknowledge how many people in Nova Scotia feel so strongly that they will write their MLAs, send us emails, written and typed letters that I got through the regular post. I was amazed, just even in this last winter, around February, we got a lot about the SPCA losing their funding, or at least saying. Now, I know there was a dispute about that, but the letters, I was just reviewing 2 of them here that I just happened to have still with me in my bag, and they were saying that they were so concerned the SPCA didn't have the funds to do the work they do to prevent cruelty to animals. And what amazed me really was that we have some very significant problems, that relate to people, to poverty, to homelessness, to let's just say people issues where there's suffering of individual people. And for some reason, that doesn't generate the amount of feedback that we got around animals. And I think that without a doubt, people have a very strong connection to their pets and to animals in general. I would wish as well that they would correspond with us as much about some of the other social ills and the suffering of our fellow man. But at the same time, I was really struck by the depth of their feelings in the letters and emails that I was getting. Some of them, of course, we were receiving that were going directly to the Premier or to the Minister. We were being copied on them, and I can only imagine how many letters the Minister received, because I got an awful lot in my office alone, and they use words like heart-rendering. They talked about watching the news when the SPCA made their announcement, and they were, a number of them say they have tears in their eyes, that they were crying when they watched the TV coverage of this. So it really affects people deeply, and I think that the bill we see before us today, the amendments that are here for animal protection, really are an outcrop of that. They've flown, come from the outflow of emotion and concern that the public has shown. And I think it did show that in 2009, there was a good effort made to update the Act and improve it, but there were shortcomings or gaps. And I think that this is an attempt then to fill in those gaps, to start to address the concerns around animal care and so on. There's going to be a lot of questions, Madam Speaker, around what regulations come into play. And this is an area that's going to remains a question. We don't know what regulations will come into play, but in reading the bill and the notes to the bill, a lot of it says this is going to expand the minister's scope, or regulations are going to be provided in the future. And I'd like to reiterate some of the comments of the member from Kings West, and just saying this is an opportunity for the public to be heard, and I really do hope that this is not going to be done in isolation. It doesn't have to be an expensive way to communicate, but if the government were to open up email submissions and letters and so on, I think that people have suggestions that would be important to listen to, because again, I think that it's important that we acknowledge the depth of concern and caring that is out there in the public. And again, initially, when the bill was announced, we didn't hear anything about tethering of dogs. Today, in the minister's introduction of the bill, there was a mention around the care of animals, which standards in care for animals, which would include tethering and animal restraints. And I think animal houses, you talked about dog houses, I think, so what shelter they have. But at the same time, I think there's a great deal of concern about the harsh winters, the cold weather and storms, and animals being left outdoors. And I really think that needs to be part of it. And it may not be the main piece, but it needs to be addressed in pretty clear language. So perhaps it would appear that we have to wait for the regulations to see that spelled out. It's very different, and I understand that even from discussions I've had with other members. The concern in the city might be different from the country, where people, I don't know if people have more dogs in the country, or our dogs in the city are more house dogs, they're always inside. But I've heard people say that there might be a bit of a difference there, but we still have to keep them from suffering. We have to keep them safe. We have to look after the animals that are in our care, absolutely. So I don't think it matters if you're on a farm or a country home as opposed to living in the city. It's certainly in the city we can see the animals because we live close together. They're not hidden down long driveways or lanes, and that might actually mean that fewer of them are being left out or being neglected, because it would very quickly come to light in a city suburb like the one I live in. But I do know there are a lot of dogs certainly in my area. I don't have a dog only because our life is too busy in the legislature. I've mused about it often, and I have been told to look at that later on when there's more time, because dogs do require a lot of care and attention. In speaking about the care of dogs, I did want to mention that another concern might be dogs left in cars. And we hadn't discussed that today, and that wasn't the focus of our letters in February when the weather was cold. But last year there were 7 dogs that died in cars from the heat. And that's also a very big concern, whether people are not aware, don't understand the concerns. But again, if others had the right to take action, those dogs may not have died if people could move and do something about it. So maybe I would like to draw the minister's attention to that, Madam Speaker, just hoping that will also be included in the care and concern. And I'm certain the minister and his staff have the list of all animals that have died that have been recorded. I would hope that you know of the ones that have died from any neglect or concern like that. But certainly those figures have been gathered up. Madam Speaker, the idea of the puppy mills is a grave concern, and I don't think we've really completely found the answer yet. My question is whether people will pay for that veterinarian certificate and so on, but it is an attempt. I think we're the first in Canada was what was said in the press release or the minister's statements as well. And so perhaps we can see how it works and try and enforce that. Again, the difficulty is the enforcement of it, and part of that is asking individuals to be careful about where they buy their animals. And that, again, if you want to rescue an animal, you can rescue an animal directly from the SPCA or from a shelter of some sort. You don't need to, and you shouldn't be going to buy animals on Kijiji or somewhere where you can't trace them. And so hopefully people will learn that that's just an invitation to encourage people to do more of this breeding of dogs, because there's big money involved. At the end of the day, there is a lot of money involved for unscrupulous dog breeders who don't even care what breed of dog it is. They simply sell puppies, and it's very distressing to see what the care is for those animals in many cases. So I'm pleased to see we're the first to try something different. I've often complained here that Nova Scotia is too much of a follower, that we don't want to step out and be the first to do something. And I think in this case, probably with the help of public concern and public outcry, we are taking some more dramatic steps. I'd like the minister to consider again the idea of a lifetime ban for certain people. I know there's been names mentioned here in the House about names that have repeatedly come up in the press around cruelty to animals, and I think it is more than warranted where there is repeat offenders, and maybe it's not the third offense, but maybe the fourth. We need to say at some point you're absolutely unfit to be a pet owner. We just have to lay it down. So I think that that's something we could look at from other places as well. And again, in looking at this, I hope there'll be consultation for regulations, because always in opposition, I've been concerned about acts that leave a great deal open to future regulations that government and their advisors and staff can come up with. So I think that it's important that other people have a chance to have a say in that, and that we make an avenue open to the public to do so. I know that the minister will talk to veterinarians, and I'm certain that certain professional groups will be involved, or the SPCA. I wanted to just touch on the SPCA again. I know there was perhaps a little bit of a spat between the minister and the SPCA about whether or not they had their funding or adequate funding, whether or not they could carry out their work with the funding they were given. But I think it's really important, not unlike so many of the other organizations and nonprofit groups that are doing good work in our province, whether you're talking about groups that help children, women, poverty groups, child welfare groups. Some of those are nonprofit agencies that are delivering services, and the SPCA is our main group for delivering services that would help for animal cruelty. And it's certainly the one that's known around the world. It's the name that's recognizable, that people, it has over 100-year history. People know the SPCA, and they rely on it. And I think that we need to look at that and say, are they providing a service in a cheaper, more efficient manner than government could do? And I think without a doubt they are. When I think back to my time on Halifax City Council, or HRM Council, definitely the cost of providing services is a lot if you have your own animal control people. It's much better to have a contract with an agency that can go do that, rather than having city staff. Yeah, I know they have, and I realize there might be some difficulties, but I think that they are the recognized agency that people know and respect, and I think that we need to set standards for their care, and then their provision of service. But if they're doing the work, we need to make sure they're adequately funded. That's all I'm saying. And I know the letters I got were not people who worked for the SPCA or had any vested interest, but they cried out to us. In fact, they used the words like, "I appeal to you to do something. Please do something for the SPCA." So people really have a lot of respect for that group. So I'm just saying they need to be supported so that they can do the work that needs to be done. And if in another part of the province, because I know we have different agencies and different counties or whatever, then maybe there's others. Just the SPCA? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Anyway, we just need to support them. That's all I'm saying. I think on behalf of the people that I represent in Clayton Park, they've been loud and clear in saying they want to see adequate support to the SPCA, and they don't ever want to face a time when the SPCA says, I can no longer do that work. I can't protect animals. I don't have the power or the legislation to do it right. So we're working on the legislation today so that they'll actually be able to move and take action when there is distress, when there is animal anxiety. That will be better defined, and animals will be better protected as a result. I still think this is a step in the right direction. There may be further that we should go. I think there are further measures needed. And I'm looking forward to seeing who comes to law amendments and what we might hear when the public has an opportunity to speak there. But I do think that it's a good thing that the minister was listening and that he's brought amendments forward that are going to strengthen this act. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I now recognize the honourable member for Pictou East on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In the East Gallery, I would like to make an introduction. I have introduced these two special people in the past, in fact, maybe a number of times, but they are Pictonians that do a lot of work for those who have been injured in accidents. And I would like Mary Lloyd, the president of the Pictou County Injured Workers Association, and Larry Maloney, the vice president, to stand and receive a warm welcome from the House.
Welcome all of our guests to the gallery today and hope you enjoy today's proceedings. If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate the contribution by other members. I got to say, the member for Kings West spoke so long and said so little. As far as giving me something that I could go back with, he didn't seem to like the act. Didn't say what was wrong with it. And didn't really offer me anything that was going to be helpful at all. I want to make it clear that when I indicated that actually the first change, significant change for the Animal Protection Act came under the Liberals in '96, which he indicated was a good bill, and so we're amending the bill for the second time since 2009, Madam Speaker. The previous Conservative government under the minister who was from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, they also made changes to the act. The notion that for some reason we're going to draft regulation and not consult the whole process around regulations, and I'll just refer members back to the fur regulations, the Fur Industry Act. My staff, when we started that process, they told me it would take 3 years to draft the regulations. I said I want them in 1. We got them in 2. And that was a lot of consultation, I have to say, Madam Speaker, with all the stakeholders. That is what I've indicated will happen in terms of regulations for this piece of legislation. I'm really hoping at some point we will get all interested parties in a room if we can. And I think what we'd like to do is probably present a draft of regulations looking at